Let's now take a real careful look at what happens in situations where firms can actually identify willingness to pay on an individual customer basis. How does that translate into how prices get determined overall? How does that translate into what output ends up being? So that's what we want to try to find out here. Now, when might these situations come up? Well, keep in mind that, again, each of your customers might have a different price, a different maximum price or reservation price that they are willing to pay. So you've got to envision that there's a whole bunch of people lined up, they want to buy your product, and they vary significantly in terms of willingness to pay. And you can identify who those people are. Now, when might that happen? I've already mentioned car dealers. Private universities actually are an interesting example because they give out scholarships and they price discriminate by using scholarship funds. And then, of course, a lot of professions end up using first-degree price discrimination. Whenever somebody says to you, well, how much do you have in your budget? That's the first sign that they are thinking first-degree price discrimination. Now, how does this operate in terms of determination of output and prices? Well, let's start with the basic monopolist diagram. And, of course, here we have it. This is pretty much what we've seen before with one little wrinkle. We have output set where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. We have price set at the demand curve point at that output level. The green area in this slide shows something called variable profit. What's variable profit? Well, it's total revenue minus total variable cost. We don't know what fixed costs are, and it just makes the diagram messier, and fixed costs are fixed anyway, right? So the monopolist, this green area shows the difference between the revenue that you get from each transaction and the cost of each transaction. In other words, if you read it from left to right, you see the marginal revenue of the first customer and the marginal cost of the first customer, and the difference there, that distance, is shown in green. And then the marginal revenue of the second customer minus the marginal cost of the second customer. And let's say maybe quantity is 100, and at 100 you have marginal revenue equal marginal cost. Well, that distance between extra revenue and extra cost shows you variable profit, which is the same as profit plus, but there's no fixed cost consideration. So that's just the diagram being a little different. Now, let's also just kind of put in here consumer surplus, because that's, and this ought to be more familiar, that's the area above the equilibrium price and below the demand curve. So that's a triangle that we usually see. Now, let's go towards first-degree price discrimination, where the firm on each and every customer charges a different price. In other words, if we look at the last two slides, those were monopolies. Those were a single price for every customer. So keep that in mind on those last two slides. Now let's go to a situation where each customer pays a different amount. That say some customers at Duke pay full price, and then you start giving discounts, and that's how you march down the demand curve. Well, now what's going to happen? The profit for each customer is going to be the distance between the demand curve and marginal cost, not the difference from marginal revenue and marginal cost. That's the critical thing to realize here. And so the firm's total revenue, before it was the price times the quantity, and so it would be the rectangle underneath the consumer surplus rectangle. Not anymore. With everybody paying a different price, the firm's total revenue is going to be the area underneath the demand curve. So think of it as that four-sided area, go from underneath the demand curve all the way down to the horizontal axis. That's their total revenue. Then you can show their variable cost would be the area underneath the marginal cost curve, and the difference between the two would be their variable profits. In other words, variable profits would be the difference between demand and marginal cost. Now, a couple of things to note. when everybody's charging a different price, output is not going to be Q star anymore. Why? Because you can charge, let's just imagine a price that's just a notch lower than P star. Well, you're making money now at that price because that price is above marginal cost. You're going to want to produce more than Q star. In fact, you're going to continue to produce until the very last customer actually ends up paying the price that would have prevailed under perfect competition. In other words, a perfectly discriminating monopolist is actually going to end up setting output at the competitive level. So we're going to end up in a situation where output is going to be Q double star, and that's at the point where the demand curve crosses the marginal cost curve. So output is going to be at the competitive level. Now, the next difference is the company's profits are going to be a lot bigger. It's now going to be the area below the demand curve and above the marginal cost curve. So their profits are now the purple area as well as the green area. So profits are larger. Well, what else has changed? Consumer surplus. There isn't any. None whatsoever. Every customer has paid their maximum price they're willing to pay. And so there is no consumer surplus at all. So if we want to sum all this up, what you would see under perfect first-degree price discrimination is the net result is output increases actually to competitive levels, profits go up by a healthy margin, and consumer surplus vanishes in this situation. So that kind of gives us kind of leaves a funny taste in your mouth, right? On the one hand, from a resource allocation standpoint, you actually end up avoiding the deadweight loss of monopoly here because you end up producing at the competitive level. However, you do have some distributional concerns. Assuming that the producers and consumers come from different strata of society, you are more or less taking money away from consumers and giving it to producers, and that may cause some social friction. Now, let me wrap up this video by saying, all right, let's face it. As much as Harvard would like to charge a price to every customer, maybe $2 million a year tuition to the son of a wealthy oil baron, and free tuition or near free tuition, marginal cost tuition, let's say, to somebody who's had a hard run in life, they really can't do that. And even car dealers can't charge different prices to everybody. So anyway, what does this mean in practice? Well, even if the firm doesn't know the reservation price of every consumer, you can kind of guess, kind of close, or you can do some segmentation, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So this slide just shows a situation where there's, say, 6 different price categories. But there's now going to be some consumer surplus left on the table, that even the people paying the price P1, the highest price, they got some consumer surplus. But it's a way of, again, charging different prices in different price categories. And this is, again, a way of serving more customers than you would otherwise see. So in practice, you probably wouldn't charge a different price to everybody. You would probably have different price categories that would operate this way. Okay, well, I hope now everybody understands how first-degree price discrimination works in terms of its economic impact. And certainly as you get into your marketing courses, you'll have a better feel for how you can execute a first-degree price discrimination strategy.